Thank you, dear friends. This is a time when I usually talk a little bit about meditation. I'm certainly going to get to that. But I want to kind of get a sort of a little bit more overview of what we're doing in the Buddhist tradition. You know, as I've gotten older, even as I've gotten along with doing more things related to movement and body, mindfulness of body, I've changed how I like to do meditation instruction. And I just wanted to throw up a few things about some of the pitfalls that we find in some of our words that we use in the Buddhist practice. Words fail me. They fail most of us. We use them as a way for our minds to reach other minds, and it doesn't always work that well. The story is that when the Buddha was actually having his Sangha growing, he sent monks off 2 by 2 to various areas. And when he did that, he said that, teach, I guess the word that you would now use, I don't know if he used anything in his particular language at that time that meant that, use the vernacular, use what people know. Don't get tied up in getting all of these words. And yet, as Buddhism traveled through its 2.5 millennia, some of the words have gotten frozen, they've gotten solid, and they don't have that way of reacting to us. We also have, in the West, the disadvantage of most of our feeling about Buddhist words comes from 19th century British anthropologists. The 19th century British anthropologists were not necessarily interested in learning truth. They were actually interested in conquest. They were actually, if they knew what was going on with the particular people, they would be able to subjugate them a little easier. And so they came up with a lot of words that don't make the particular practice all that attractive. Even the word Buddhism did not appear anywhere in the world until the 1830s, even though we have this practice that goes on for a long time. People called it Dharma, they called it other things, but if you talk to somebody in, say, the 18th century in India about Buddhism, they wouldn't know what you were talking about. And these things are in our way, and they form a little problem for us. So I want to talk a little bit about a few of them here. So these are all things that we find so commonly in our teachings. These 5, and there could be a list, could be a lot longer about things. Emptiness. That sounds really great, nothing happened in there. Impermanence. You can't hold on to anything. No self. You don't really exist. Extinction. I say extinction simply because that's the word often used for nirvana. Nirvana, this idea of a great peace and serenity. The word used is extinction. And I'll talk about mindfulness in a little while. But these are the problems that run into it. We in the West, and especially with people with wonderful teachers like Thich Nhat Hanh, can kind of look at these in a little bit better way. When we start using the word, for example, emptiness, it does give people kind of a chill. It actually has this idea that there's nothing there. When in reality, emptiness means empty of an individual existence, empty of a particular way of being. So many of you know of the Thich Nhat Hanh example of the piece of paper. the piece of paper that exists because of sun and water and soil and the work of many people and the work of the people who support those people, the farmers, the people who are truckers. In modern day, we would look at things like marketers, all kinds of stuff that goes on. And without that, any of that, the piece of paper doesn't exist. In reality, the paper is not truly empty. It's full of everything. Everything has to go. If you take one thing away, the sun, the soil, the farmer, then the piece of paper doesn't exist. And we can see that in so many things. The Buddha statue that's on the table here, the wonderful Christine Center that is there, the water bottles. I mean, all of these things exist because everything else exists. And I like the idea that Thich Nhat Hanh has said, instead of calling everything empty, he uses the word fullness. Impermanence. Impermanence is the idea that everything is changing, everything is moving, all these sorts of things are in a flow. You are more of a process than a solid thing. You are more of a verb than a noun. There are about 80 octillion atoms in your body, and not one of them is ever stationary for any even second. Always in motion, always moving, always changing, always flowing. And I like to think that the idea of impermanence is a really kind of a bad way to look at that. It's almost as if there's nothing really happening there, when really everything is happening. So the term that Thich Nhat Hanh would use instead of impermanence is interbeing. Or as my good friend Jim Barrett would say, the big dance. There is, on a far-off galaxy somewhere, the very edge of the galaxy, many, many miles away, we can barely even get a glimpse of it with a radio telescope. There's an atom, and it has direct effect on us. Everything happens that way. Everything is so interconnected and so flowing that it basically is, again, one beautiful, beautiful web. People may know about the idea of Indra's web, where every individual, you could say person, or you could say thing, or you could even say every individual molecule is like a little nidus on this web, and it's huge, and it reflects everything else. So I like to think of it that way. When we say, self, we have no individual self. I think it was Einstein, of all people, that said, if the way that we can judge a person is their individual liberation from a self. You are in me, I am in you, and not only that, we're all in the nature outside. The deeply inner penetration of all these things is what's going on with that. So I like interpenetration. Maybe I didn't like it. Maybe I should have got a word that was a little bit shorter. But anyway, nirvana is one of those other words that's translated as extinction. And it's supposed to be extinction of all views and all desires, etc. But that just seems really cold, doesn't it? Don't we all need some views of some sort? Don't we all have some desires somewhere? The desire for freedom and justice, the desire for equality, the desire to love, the desire to protect. All of these things are not bad things. They are things that we should actually kind of cultivate. The other term, and one of our good friends, Glenn Wallace, who is a Buddhist scholar, talks about this, besides the word nirvana meaning extinction, is unloosening, unstrapping, like taking off a tight sandal or a tight shirt, letting it go. So I like to think of this as liberation. These three things here, actually, are what are called the Dharma seals. The Dharma seals are the idea of a individual connection that if you have the three Dharma seals, it's an authentic teaching of the Buddha. If we see interbeing, interpenetration, and liberation, and we can do that right on our cushions. On our cushions, while we meditate, we can expand. We can have an idea of going beyond the small individual self. If nothing else, we can expand to the people within this room. We can expand to the people beyond this room. We don't have to sit and do our individual meditation. Matter of fact, that's really one of the real problems, I think, is people who look at this, often do look at this as kind of quote unquote navel gazing. It's the individual person wanting to be able to do whatever they do. And I think that that is a lot of the way that the instructions go. But I don't think that that's the way it should be. I think we should always have interbeing, interpenetration, and liberation every time we sit on the cushion. The intention. The last year I talked about it, and I'll talk about it again this year. The two things that I like to think of that are part of the meditation instruction, besides all that body stuff. Intention and gratitude are the two things that I like to think about. And as I was thinking about intention before the talk, I said, well, what do we need when we do intention? We could have an intention to just have a better day. We can have an intention that our headache goes away. We can have all kinds of intentions related to that. But I think that the big thing that you might want to do is have this intention to connect to the big dance. And you have this desire to develop this great spaciousness that we all can connect to, that we can do that and we can be liberated. So that's my individual goal. That's something I want to invite you all to do. As you sit, think about the wonderful nature that we are inside of. Think about these individual people right here, these 24 people. You know, it's always said that, you know, if the Buddha walked in, really had the card-carrying Buddha card, we knew he was the Buddha. We would kind of fall away and, you know, offer ourselves to him. And we don't have to do that because there are Buddhas everywhere in this room. Every single one of you is a Buddha. We don't always act like it, I admit that. But every single one of us is a Buddha. So if we are in this hall full of Buddhas, how can we not help but feel expansive and liberated? We just have to make ourselves realize that and kind of go with that. So that's my goal for your meditation this evening and throughout this retreat and maybe throughout your life. Don't just sit with your individual self. Sit with the world. Sit with all of nature. Sit and breathe. Let's face it, the breathing. We're breathing in the same molecules that a T-Rex breathed 65 million years ago. We're breathing in the same things that trilobites did when they were crawling on the surface of the sea. So we have this immense amount of history, this immense connection. The big dance continues, always. There it is. Here it is. Do you want to be part? Do you want to fall into holding on to your individual self and just being there? Or do you want to be part of the big dance? I want to be part of the big dance. So let's open with that kind of thing. Mindfulness, the other thing about mindfulness is, again, those good old wonderful British anthropologists. So mindfulness, the word is sati in Pali and smrti in Sanskrit. I had a boss named Smrti, I remember that. So it was often called mindfulness, but it's also just remembering. Remembering. What do we need to remember? We need to remember we're all part of this great existence. We need to remember that. Somehow, through our bearing and through what has gone on in our lives, we have this idea that we must protect this little individual self. And much better to kind of connect to everybody and remember that it is not an individual practice. Thich Nhat Hanh has said, happiness is not an individual matter. Liberation is not an individual matter. I don't think you can really liberate yourself unless you liberate others. I don't think you can really have happiness unless you have happiness for others. Going with this practice, it's sort of expanding as we go. So, my basic meditation instruction, which I have boringly fostered on people for years, about the way that the body posture is and the way we do our breath. I'll repeat the short version, which is sit up straight, follow your breath, and smile. That's pretty much the whole 9 yards. When I used to go and do 30 minutes talking about making sure your elbows were in the right place and that your spine was everything else. But more importantly with that is to open your heart, open your consciousness, allow yourself this tremendous spaciousness that we all can go with. So sometimes I think, and I probably was at fault with this a lot in myself, is the idea that doing this little practice, doing it quote unquote right while you sit on the cushion, was so important because you had to do this kind of thing and you had to look for your own individual, how is my mind doing? How is my breath doing? All of this my stuff. It's not your breath, it's our breath. It's not your mind, it's my mind. It's my mind, it's everybody's mind. If we open up to that, your meditation becomes extremely liberating, extremely valuable, a wonderful way to be. So sit on your cushion and follow your breath and smile. I said I wouldn't do much about the body part, but I do want to mention that. That's very much the Thich Nhat Hanh tradition, the Plum Village tradition. I don't think I've seen that in people who studied other practices. Let me know if I'm missing that. The idea of having a smile on your face is specifically Thich Nhat Hanh. It is said that your smile can be the result of your joy, but your joy can be the result of your smile, bringing a little smile to kind of get with that way. Because when it really comes down to it, we don't want to make mindfulness practice and meditation this kind of grit your teeth, suck it up and meditate. We want it to be a celebration. We want it to be open. We want it to be able to be connected to everything else. So what I would recommend is to have a great open-heartedness with your meditation. Sit here, but don't just sit here. Sit out there, sit everywhere. Feel yourself expanding all throughout this center, this city, this planet, this universe, these galaxies, just kind of being there. And be really, you have been invited to the big dance. And just one, but a very important one of these keys is to be liberated through the beautiful practice of Zazen sitting meditation. So I invite you to do that. We're going to take a little bit of a break here. It's about 8:10. And as we will do every night, we will have meditation from about 8:30 to 9:30 to close up the evening. So let's all just kind of take a break and be comfortable. You've been very patient waiting through our technological snafus and everything else. So we can come back here in 20 minutes and we can